Okay, it's great to be here. Now let's eat lunch. Right? I'll be brief. I'll jet through this, but I think the fairest thing to state right up front is that my family was a Geechee family. My mother grew up on the Sea Islands of South Carolina, and there, rice is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the only alteration is for breakfast, you have rice and peas, which are Sea Island little red peas, they're cowpeas. And for dinner, if you're very poor, you have peas and rice. You change the name, but it's the same food. This is evidenced by the fact, and this is about a cultural exercise, that you judge the viability of rice culture by what's on the rim of the cast iron pot over decades. If you find a cast iron pot at a garage sale in the Sea Islands that has a red ring in it, you know that was a real Geechee family. Anyone ever heard the term? Yeah, it means rice with every meal. And it's African in origin, the term is. And the idea there is that in my household with my Geechee mom, I was never allowed to cook rice for anyone in the family but our pets. Our pets had rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and so did we. And I was the pet cook, right? Which is why I'm standing before you today, not as a chef. Okay? So I had a real dumb idea in retrospect, but I thought it was brilliant when I started. I was doing a dinner for the Smithsonian in Savannah, Georgia, at a property that I just built. I used to build hotels from historic properties. I'd convert them into inns and hotels. And I had this beautiful hotel, and it was a Smithsonian tour. So the whole board was there inbound, and they'd paid $2,000 a head for a dinner. And I had gotten what I thought was ready-to-go Carolina Gold rice, having no idea what the hell that is, but the guy told me at the Smithsonian that they wanted to have a Carolina rice dinner. And they also wanted to have red rice, and I sent him a recipe with ketchup in it and God knows what else, and he said, no, you need to go back and read something, you're an idiot, right? And he said, $2,000 a seat, I want a historian in on this. So I started talking to people that knew something about rice culture besides my mom, who actually never made red rice at home much, but it was a celebratory dish, and I never got to watch her. She didn't let people be in the kitchen with her when she was cooking because she was a hotelier, and that happened at work. She was a private exercise for her at home. So I didn't grow up at the side of my mother like so many chefs did, learning all these fabulous dishes. I had them at the table, though. We were so Geechee, by the way, I don't know whether anybody in here is old enough, I don't think so, to remember that Sunday night was only dessert. It's at 7 o'clock, nothing else served but dessert. It was a wonderful upbringing. So, I'm doing this dinner for the Smithsonian, and they've asked for red rice because it's in Savannah, and Savannah's known for red rice. We were just talking about another red rice that will come up in just a second. And my friend, Dr. Richard Schultz, was growing for the Church of the Holy Trinity Episcopal Church for the mission Carolina Gold rice. I had no idea how extraordinary that was. He'd gotten the seed originally from Charles Bullock he said it was from China, and I actually thought he meant China, by the way. I said, ooh, Chinese rice from Carolina, how cool, because the saying in Charleston is, we eat rice and worship our ancestors. That's the same thing as happens in Asia. There's no difference at all. Oh, by the way, where is the highest rice per capita consumption on the East Coast? Carolina. Charleston. All right? I cheated. Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah. Everybody's Geechee down there. Okay, so I had all this wonderful culture in front of me. I had no idea what was going on. I said, ooh, Carolina rice from China. I sent that back to the Smithsonian. It came blazing back on fire. It said, please let me speak to somebody that has a brain. So Dr. Richard Schultz is very educated, thank God. He's a Princeton grad. And Charles Bullock had been kind enough to blow up enough seed for Richard Schultz to ruin it. Okay? Let me repeat that. I'm going to come over here and repeat it because my message today has to do with how grateful I am there's such a thing as pure seed. Charles Bullock worked for 3 years to get enough Carolina Gold rice seed so that Dick Schultz, who has a postdoc in ophthalmic surgery and is a historian and a bona fide good one, could ruin it. What'd he do? Richard planted this rice to rice to rice to rice to rice, and rotated out. Every year he grew rice, and it was for a mission. It was for a good cause. And so you could get a little bag from the Church of the Holy Trinity, and it was killer. It was very good rice, right? And all of a sudden, there was less rice. And as I'm coming in with my Smithsonian dinner, there's less rice. I call him up. By the time the Smithsonian gets the history straight, and Richard weighs in, thank God, there wasn't any rice left. He only had a little bit of seed stock. I didn't even know what that was. Okay, so here's the lesson. He sends me what's left of the rice he's not going to have to plant. I thought that was odd. Why do you have to save rice to plant? You know? What do I know? So I'm in Gucci's and a really expensive suit for a $2,000 dinner with 17 guests from the Smithsonian. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The rice comes in. We're going to cook it. And there's little black things crawling all around it. And there's little red things in there. Not only black things, there's red things in there. I said, isn't this supposed to be white? Right? Fast forward 20 years later. That was a disaster. We did get the rice cooked. We had to pick all the weevils out. We pulled all the reds out. Me, the dishwashers, I was supposed to read the history presentation to the guests. I never made it out front. I turned into a melting sweat blob. I went out, burnt my shoes and my suit, sold my Lexus, and decided to be a rice farmer. Okay, let's eat.
What year is this? What year was this?
20 years ago. Okay. The little red things were weedy red. Why? Dr. Schultz did something no one had done in a century. He repatriated a lost rice. It was not in production when he started. That was 1983, I believe. Probably have documentation on that. Yeah. So he's growing it in the same land. So you want to fast forward 20 years? I just spent, I don't know, about $18,000 on those same fields myself. I'm now farming those same fields. My first view of Carolina Gold was weeded up with reds in that field that I'm doing now. The weedy rice that's red has no dormancy. It'll be there forever. I've had fields blow up after they haven't been farmed in a century. First year, a few reds. Second year, a lot. Third year, boom, it's all red. Okay? What the message here is, what is this conference really about? Pure seed. If you're going to be in business, which we do it culturally first, then we bleed a lot to grow rice, you know, stoop labor. Didn't go out of fashion yet, did it? Last but not least, if we're going to do it, we have to have pure seed. Had I not met marvelous Dr. Anna McClung, I wouldn't be standing here today either. Because my idea was to grow corn, make a lot of money, because I knew a lot of chefs, and they were going to buy my corn in grits and whatever. And then I was going to grow rice with the money I made from the chefs. That's actually still true today, but had I known what I'd have to go through to get here, I'm not so sure I would have done it. You know, this is my first conversation with Anna. You probably don't remember. Dr. McClung, hi, I'm Glenn Roberts. I'm over here in South Carolina, and I can hear the eye roll in the background. Oh, God, right? South Carolina, oh, no, weedy rice, right? I need to know how to grow rice. She sends me the pamphlet, which I still have on the wall, which says how to grow rice. And I call her back and said, okay, I need the rice. And she says, what? You know, and so I start noodling her, and she said, Glenn, it lodges. And I said, what's that? That's how stupid I am. If you put too much nitrogen on it, it grows up and falls over. On its own, it doesn't even need wind. Plant too close, grows up, falls over. Big storm, blows down. It's kind of hard to be in business with rice that's flat. You can't pick it up with a combine. Every 2 feet, pick it up, cut it, back up, 2 feet again, pick up again. Might as well do it by hand. So I learned immediately what lodging meant. Anna told me, you know, she was actually very nice. She said, plant the seeds at least as distance by your hand. That's how far she had to go to get me into business. You know, you put one seed there, put your hand down, put your seed in the next one. Or better yet, Glenn, plug it, right, and then transplant it. Then you'll know where you're putting it. You don't have to guess where the seeds are. So I started to plant out, I got lost with the seeds. I called her up and said, I don't think I have enough seeds, right? So, having said this first thing, brought to you by Seed Purity, in order to do what I do now since 1998, you have to either know an extremely competent breeder and seedsman or become one yourself. And Takeshi, we all know, right? It's difficult, right? So the become one yourself is always helpful because it speeds conversations to understand and appreciate the long line of starting with pure seed that goes through some kind of certification eventually. That means a human being is roguing the seed plant, taking out everything that is not characteristic description, the way the plant is supposed to replicate, even to root structure. Because you don't know where your next thing's coming from if you're actually trying to get to scale. Scale meaning mid-scale farming. After all this time, we just put a seed house together. That doesn't mean we're seedsmen, but that means we have the equipment to do it. A gravity table, color sorter, big 6-stack clipper cleaner, that sort of thing. But in the field, we have to have these routines in order to do wheat, buckwheat, whatever. So having said that, some long-term plan that gets support for seed health, because there are seed-borne diseases, some long-term plan that doesn't allow somebody to come in and pass out stuff that's got weedy rice in it that has no dormancy, so you're out there trying to figure out what you're growing, and you got a weed that won't ever go away, right? What was the number one thing for weedy reds? Non-selective herbicide, paraquat, sounds like Vietnam. And that still is not totally effective. And then skimming the surface for years with beans and stuff. So, seed purity is number one. How did Anson Mills survive over the 15 years we've been doing it? We're doing $3 million a year, have about 60 farms now. The major thing, 90% of what we do is give seed away, over 50 tons last year. That's 50 tons. And we give it to both farmers who are in production and new farmers on all different levels, from tons down to a couple of pounds. And it's not all rice, it's all the crops that go with rice. So the second thing today in marketing too and culture is that it's just not rice. You have to rotate your land out. So if you've got paddies you've built, you keep growing rice to rice to rice in them up here, you're going to start to disease up at year 3, maybe even sooner, but certainly not going to be the healthiest thing in the world for you.
What if you put a cover crop in?
That's what I'm talking about.
Put over the winter and then have rice again the next year?
That's a perfect point. Our first rice farmers in the South Carolina were from Italy. The seed they planted most likely was Nostrali, which is one of the main production rices from the 1400s forward in the Po. And I guess you'd call Nostrali the father of Violone Nano, which is a pretty elite sort of porridge rice, which we know in risotto cookery if you go to really elite restaurants here, but pretty down and dirty restaurants in Italy where the still farming traditions reign. And then the other like derivatives of this that it was all cleaned up in 1937. The Italian government came together in 1937, and the decade prior, by the way, it took 10 years, and cleaned up all these old rices so that it would survive through the 20th century. So they created arborio and carnaroli and Violone Nano out of rices that pre-existed. So we have that heritage from our Italian rice farmers who brought in rice. The winter crop was wheat, and that was any of the farros and other Italian macaroni wheats. Then we had Huguenots that came in and took it away from the Italians. Those French people brought in Huguenot wheat, and they brought in rice culture from Spain. Go figure. I don't see any Bamba in any of the literature, though, by the way. So the whole progress starts with Italian rice growers, and that's 1675, becomes African by 1710. Italians are gone in horticulture and their methods too by probably 1740. 1730, you have Sephardi coming in, and that invasion was wonderful. You have the Germans coming in somewhere around 1710 and doing wheat culture by 1730, then coming back down and bringing the wheat culture into the rice fields for rotation by 1750. By the Revolution, we were doing scientific farming. After the Revolution, the New York Agricultural Society was formed. The second one was the South Carolina Agricultural Society. All those journals are still intact. So they talk about how to handle land-race rice. What's not clear in those journals, until you read really closely, is that the seed protocol for all of those rices was huge. For seed plots, they'd cut, you see where they had, in Dominique's presentation, they had a seed area. In South Carolina, they'd have to cut pure cypress, untainted swamp, for seed production every year. And they had seed biosecurity centers, in modern parlance, where it was scattered every 100 miles. There was a big, expensive seed effort and seed caches. Store 3 years of seed. Okay? So I'm almost there. All this adds up to something that when you're aging rice, which we don't talk about in America, which I know, how many people know about aging rice? Okay, we don't know about it in America because we don't think about seedsmanship in America. But if you think about having to save 3 years of rice, our motto at Anson Mills is, we're 2 hurricanes away from oblivion. We get one in South Carolina and one at Beaumont, Texas, and we're out of business, right? So we save tons of seed back every year, refrigerated, so that we can replant. One of the serendipitous things that happens when you save seed is you start to understand the seasonality of cereals, which is fabulous. You start to understand new crop rice and how wonderful that is, which we don't have the designation in this country. You start to understand aging rice, because you have it. Does the rice taste different at 3 years than it did at year 1? Of course it does. If you happen to be storing it with wild bay to keep bugs off of it, well, it's perfumed. That's kind of interesting. So you go back in the lit, and you see every once in a while punches of seed rice going as elite rice to Europe at really high prices, called Laurel aged rice. That was excess seed stock. That was marketing too, as Anna's want to say. Anna, I love this rice. Yes, Glenn, but marketing is the only thing that gets it done. You have to market. So that's one nuance of something called the Carolina Rice Kitchen. Carolina Rice Kitchen is the body of cuisine that goes with the farming system that's associated with hidden gardens. That's slaves running off and growing their own stuff. Then market farming of rice. And last but not least, the elite and arcane gardens that led to things like, after the Civil War, it took 90 days to catalog the plants at Seabrook Plantation by the Union troops. 90 days. They never even made it to the main house. It was over 100 acres of exotic plants, palm, kale, everything. Okay? So what we've done is we've mined the Carolina Rice Kitchen, we've mined the farming and the farming journals, we've mined the process of rice and seedsmanship, and we've put it all together and then dumped it in the lap of a bunch of chefs, then tried to retranslate it back to the American public. Mostly we haven't done a good job on the retail side, but we do have 4,000 chef clients, and we are doing really well. Knock on wood. There is, by the way, you probably know this if you're in the food industry, there is no recession in the food industry, period. It is crazy. We're up 130% over last year. For whatever reason, I don't know. We actually did not market that, right? And now, since we grow everything and we're on seedsmen, when I cut the rice contracts in Texas to back all this stuff up this year, for all the stuff we're doing in South Carolina, up to and including like they got all the permits at Orton Plantation, they're all done. It was in the Raleigh News and Observer last week. 370 acres mitigated down to 305 of rice fields that the 336th wealthiest man in the United States is just going to throw money at it till he sees rice growing. That's huge. So it's happening in droves. And the backdrop, because Susan mentioned global climate change, the backdrop, I do work with the Hopi, work with the Navajo, work with the Pima. They said, we've all seen this before. It's in our stories. When they say they've seen it, it means they have a story for it, okay? This is not new to them. If you think about, I have to plant corn, I got to go 5 feet down to plant it to get to the seep water, they can deal with climate change. In our view, this is liable to be tropical up here someday. But in the reality view, we don't know what's going to happen because it's change. And change means you have to have rice that's suited to the area you grow it. Our rices, I cheated. We already had a rice culture. We had all the histories. We knew what we were supposed to plant. And Anna had the genetics. She knew how to get it to us so that we could actually count on it year in, year out if we were spread out enough. That has to happen up here too. You have brethren in this effort. Sarah's funding the wheat people up here, should probably do some talking. They're centered Deerfield and SIT and Unity, Maine, but doesn't include New York, unfortunately, because that would really help. But the ideas for marketing any cereal obviously work for any cereal. And one of the best ideas for marketing is to market the entire farming system. In the age where everybody wants to understand farming, they're really hungry to understand, as our good friend brought up, what goes with the rice. What legumes go with rice. If you're doing a rice up here, then legumes are going to go with it. They'll sell just as fast. And I think $10 a pound is super reasonable for seeing what I'm seeing out here. There's just no other place like it, period. Find me one. This is so cool. Right? Questions? Yes?
There's a couple in Amherst named Ben and Avery Lester who have what they call Wheatberry Bakery, and they've got a grains CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, and we've been members for several years, and as near as I can figure out, they're getting $3 to $4 a pound, at least $3 for things like wheat and spelt, and they've offered us $2 a pound if we can come up with enough brown rice.
That's great.
They can have some for their members. But how else do people market? It seems like what you've described is what I would call a niche market. People who will pay premium prices for locally grown grains that they know where they came from, and preferably organic. What other marketing methods are there that can help turn this from experimental, isolated efforts into a business that hopefully people can live off of?
That's fabulous. Somerset Mill in Maine is a really good example of how you draw all infrastructure and sourcing together, but not the seedsmanship, which is why I said it first. Right? You draw everything together. They're hugely successful. They have the kneading conference. I don't know if you've heard of it, but 3,000 people show up to have flatbreads in a field, 28 hearth ovens going to town out there. The best bakers in New England are all out there doing it in Skowhegan this time of year. They just had it, I guess.
Yeah, last weekend.
It's just called Knead now. You need it. That's K-N-E-A-D, right?
It's a kneading conference. It was the 6th annual one this year.
Yeah. And they have Kneading Conference West now. I was there for the first or the second one. I don't know. I could tell they were going to pull it all together. But Steve Jones stood there. He's wheat breeder and well known for his work in landrace wheats in the PNW out in Washington. Steve Jones said to everybody there, I was in the audience going, yes, yes, yes. I was like whistling because I'm a groupie for scientists, man. You know, and everybody else is going, what's this guy talking about? And he's talking about plant path, he's talking about fusarium, post-harvest handling, and everybody's going, cricket, 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 you know. So the answer is to pre-sell a CSA and capitalize a mill, which is what they did. Have central processing to start with, and then everybody else can do what a guy in my crummy old mill town, which is Columbia, South Carolina, back in the 70s, during the 60s, hippie era, he actually had a huller and patty rice. I think it was steamed and sterilized so we could do it legally, but you could go in and hull your own rice right there in the shop, just like in Asia, which is very cool.
And that's a good question, because we haven't grown enough in 3 years to have anything more than seed. But one thing I worry about is hopefully when and if we get to the point of being able to sell, how do you do the hulling? I read on the internet about machines far away in Asia, but I don't know. I think there's one here, but
you pre-sell your CSA. It's done all over the United States. People will invest in you. It's crowdsourcing. You just put it up on the web. Just pick one of the sourcing things. You'll get showered with money because you actually have a history of trying to pull this off.
where do you get a small-scale hulling machine?
They're everywhere.
Okay.
Everywhere. You know, I shouldn't start plugging companies. I've been treated really well by my Japanese rice engineers. I do not speak Japanese, and I have a friend who's a horrible stoner, excuse me, but he translates if it's earlier than noon, which is difficult time zone-wise. He is not capable of translating afternoon. Mostly he's in the Whataburger parking lot saying, this is the best meal I've ever had in my life. That's when I hang up the phone. But he's brilliant. He's worked for every big mill in the Sacramento Valley, knows everybody personally. By the way, if you want, here's another thing. If you want to get very successful, everybody in this room is a vertical learner, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't. Talk to the best people. Just call them up that you admire, anybody. I called up Jessica Lundberg at Lundberg Rice. I didn't know her from Adam. I said, I'm flying out. I have a meeting with you. She said, who the hell are you? And I said, I'm Glenn Roberts. I'm flying out to talk to you. She said, what do you do? I said, nothing. I just want to talk to you. And I kept saying it. And she finally said, oh, hell, come on. I got to spend 2 weeks with her. Lundberg is, you know, they've got, their engineer grows the best Pinot Noir grapes in California. Their rice engineer. They got the coolest rice engineer in the state. So there's lots of practical ways to get to this. And then the other is to travel. Yes?
But also, you want to get the word out in terms of turning it into a hot thing. And so, I mean, you've got your local stuff, but people, there's a limit. People who do CSA buying often are local people who don't have loads of money. So it is worth thinking about the elite thing, too, because that word filters down from the top. And you talked about chefs, and it's actually the chefs, and I'm not saying that everything should work from the top down, but it really helps. If you have chefs in this area, down to Boston, to New York, if they know that there's locally grown organic rice, it turns into this special, incredible thing. And then they say, whoa, and they put on their menus in their way, and they say to you, the diner, coming in for your treat big meal, or to their regulars who regularly spend that much money, I've got this incredible thing. It's very special. I've got a limited amount. It's like, you know, truffles or something. There's a season for it because I'm going to run out of it. You know, they do this whole thing. That pumps you up. You have the rice and you taste it and its distinctiveness. And then you say to your friend, hey, you know, I had this incredible rice. Your friend is also going to go draw. And then the word gets out and it's in, and then Saveur writes an article about it and they say there's this incredible thing going on. No, but seriously. So the editor of Saveur said to me, well, if you're going to this rice thing, well, what does it taste like? And I said, I don't know. I'll see. I'm sure it's fabulous. But he said, we can't write about it until we can get some for our kitchen to test it and taste it and photograph it and so on, and then we can come up and do a story. And I'm just saying, that's the kind of thing that long-term helps you with your marketing, because If it's in the magazines, then your CSA people are going to say, oh wow, in my backyard, I can get some of that. Okay, actually I'm prepared to pay a premium for it because it's special to taste it. That's how you have to do it, because if you're, otherwise you're doing the heavy lifting. You need the leverage of the, sort of some kind of national media, and the rock star thing really does help with these specific agricultural things. Sorry,
You know who the next rock stars are in the food industry? Did Southern Living call you last week? Donna Floria is going to call you. Anybody know what the Nordic invasion is? Twigs and berries from Denmark, Noma. You know, oh boy, I found some moss on the beach, let's eat it. That's what I call it. Bob Kincaid, Boston guy, it's coined the term twigs and berries. This foraging movement had a life for people my age in the 1970s. And Kincaid named it the Twigs and Berries movement, and it was passed around all the cool chefs at the time. Oh yeah, there's a twigs and berries forage. So somebody comes rolling in from the woods and he's like covered in like ticks and everything. Said, here's the mushrooms. You know, that's the twigs and berries thing. Everybody know who Harold McGee is? Harold McGee? Food scientist, right? What's the Nordic invasion? It is the foraging movement clashes with food science. What's the outfall? The seedsmen, the breeders, the scientists are the next rock stars. It was chefs, then it was millers, then it was cocktail people, then it was butchers. We're just coming off of that one. Don't you love these culinary fashions? I'm so old I make myself sick. Anyhow, the next one, you know why? Because we're all talking about it. Because they know we can't do anything without them. I always get asked, and it's great idea here, well, what do you do about ADM? I said, they know it doesn't work. They're working on this as hard as we do. They really do know it. Well, what about Cisco? Well, Cisco knows it doesn't work too. They're working on this really hard too. The salons and TED, one of the big deals at TED and Aspen right now, just finished, was a salon from the James Beard Foundation. They went around the country, filmed 300 small producers, trying to get a bead on what to do next with the food system. Everybody's working on it.
You mean the big guys are looking?
They've been looking. They're looking harder. You know, my first visit, when I went into business with rice, somebody heard I got some rice equipment. Archibald Daniels Midland, in a Gulf 4, I think back then, or 3. They flew into Charleston and asked if they could hull some GMO rice that we were working in a co-op with Syngenta. And I'm going, how the hell do you guys know this? They know everything because they're really smart and they have to deal with the same stuff we're talking about here. There is no divide. Everybody's going, oh wow, there's 3 green spots in 4,000 acres right now in Yale, Illinois. My 3 cornfields. Everything else is brown. In Columbia, South Carolina, I harvested maize last week. Everybody else cut it in. 3,000 acres around me right there.
Why?
Brown. Huh? Because it's bred for more water than it got. My stuff's landrace. It's drought tolerant. It's used to it. My peas, I took Dan Barber, speaking of chefs, took Dan Barber to this lesson. Commercial soy, commercial soy, commercial soy. 100-acre fields all the way, non-irrigated, right? And then my Sea Island peas, 70 acres. Brown, already turned in, green, and we're picking them. Okay? So everybody knows this. Everybody knows it. There's no division. There used to be this big scientific barrier. There isn't one. Anna was a pioneer, Susan, pioneer in breaking this stuff down. The generation before them was steer scientists, wonderful people, but frankly, I'm intimidated by all of them, to tell you the truth, because they know more than we know, and they're giving it. If you ask a question, you're going to get a real answer. If you don't do your homework, you're screwed. That's my advice to you. Do your homework, read. Yes?
One thing I learned from Ben and Adri Lester at Wheatberry, though, is generations before that, for thousands of years, they've been collecting like types of rice seed, and what they tell me is that, like, say, in isolated European valleys, the peasants spent centuries picking the best plants so that they would have the most disease-resistant, fastest-growing, drought-resistant seed for their particular area, and apparently that may go back to the Middle Ages.
It goes back to antiquity, and one thing to add to that is flavor. They picked for flavor.
Oh, you mean the difference between your tomatoes or mine and what we get in the grocery store?
Or my wheat and yours. What all this presupposes, what we assume in thinking about what happened before industrialization, is we have a neighbor to talk to. This is testimony to the fact that there can be neighbors, Takeshi. How cool. But we don't have neighbors yet. If my wheat went down 150 years ago, my neighbor got a crop. He got a rain strip that I didn't. I drought it out. I'm cool. Now, I mean, the smallest commercial farm is 3 times the size of any farm in the old days, except for the plantation system, and they were run like small farms. Everybody had a task. You mentioned about slavery. Standing over the water, on top of the mirror with 100% humidity, there's a way to grow up and be a real human being. It's crazy. And if you haven't done it, I suggest you try. You should do it. It gives you a really great appreciation for where all this came from. Because the only people out there doing it, first it was Irish and Native Americans, by the way. There were no blacks in the first rice fields in my area. Then we started getting serious about production, and they brought in tons of rice slaves. And they were called rice slaves because they knew how to do rice. Yes?
So how do we deal with climate change? Because it's going faster and faster and faster. So do we have to change our seed in 20 years?
Well, here's one of the things that Susan and Sandy touched on. They've got some short rice. They got a tall rice. There's a lot of land race history in the taller one and the short ones, by the way, because all of the bred rices come out in natural breeding. We're not talking about gene jockeys. All the best rice geneticists have to do both now, by the way. So they know this stuff inside and out. It's really cool. But their gene jockeys can create anything, but in natural selection, you can breed down over time. Gene jockeys can work much more quickly. Am I saying that right? I don't want to. Okay. And you'll hear about this later today, but the tall purple sticky rice, that's a landrace rice. Tons of like frontline genetics from antiquity in there, probably, what, 6,000 years maybe? I don't know. It's been around that long, probably. So a lot of genetic history there, and the selections that are being made includes that information in the selections, and that's a lay term. I'm not a geneticist, as everybody knows. I can barely drive a car.
You don't have to change your seed, it will just adapt as the climate changes?
They always have, but they've interacted with humans to do that as well. There's no such thing as a farmer that's not a breeder in a landrace system if they want to survive. My point being, prior to industrialization, there were farmers that ate, and there were farmers that only ate because there were farmers that ate, right? Some people are talented at this. And by the way, what gender are they? They're women. Without exception. I don't know what it is about guys and genetics, but it just doesn't happen. I think they're just malingerers. Hey, where's the wine? You know? That's good, right? Should we? Yes.
I'm just wondering, I'm looking, I enjoy drinking beer, and I'm fascinated watching the beer industry. My grandfather was actually vice president of a beer company.
Cool.
That's no longer around. After Budweiser and whatnot basically took over. But now, interestingly, you have all these small microbreweries popping up. And the only part of the industry that's really growing is the small brewers.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the other big guys are looking at that and saying, holy crap.
This is terrific. This should be the last thing, right? Okay, this is perfect. In thinking about marketing, Jim, this is killer. You have to look at everything, and honestly, in order to market, you've got to become a brewer. It's in your bones, good, right? Not to brag, but I will. Anson Mills just released a Dogfish Head Brewery positive contact beer. It's all our grain inside. David Chang was the brewmaster along with Sam Castiglione and who else? Mario Batali, right? So when you're talking about chefs and your connection with chefs, if you tell these guys over and over again long enough, hey, this is the oldest grain in the world. They used Faro, Italian accession of Triticum dicoccum was an emmer. A nice one. There's not that much left in the seed bank in Italy, but it is a nice one. And we grow it, so we slow roasted it, and then Sam dropped it into the vat right near the end in the boil, and then they put in a bunch of other goo-gah. I haven't had the beer yet, so I don't know whether it's any good, but it's selling like hotcakes, right? It was like $200 a set. It comes with a boombox album. It's beach party beer, so it comes with an album and something else, I forget, and it comes in a 4-pack. It's nuts. But the brewery industry, you have to be careful. Cacao Prieto, I told them about one of my red corn seedsmen. They called him up, and they offered him $12 a pound. And he hadn't been with me that long. He sold out his entire seed stock and the production. He had it sitting there, so he sold his reserve. $12 a pound, I'd do it, almost, right? Luckily, we had other seed stock there. So the brewery industry is a wonderful thing, and it's also a grain hog. And the best artisan brewers are willing to pay anything. They pay 3 times market in New York for Brooklyn brewing. So if you've got good wheat, it's worth 3 times as much by the ton in a bag. They got to have it in a bag. I don't know why that is. You know, they can't take it in a ton quantity in a tote or anything. But it's a huge, huge market. And it's growing unabated, I guess. So yeah, it's a great point. Crowdsourcing these marketing ideas, by the way. In California Community Grains, they went from 0 to 5,000 overnight. Every Whole Food in Northern California, first year. They had no production. They got all their farmers in a row. They centralized their marketing. Boom, they went as a region. So regional identity is important. I use that. All my farmers understand our foodways, our culture, where we came from. So we're all saying the same message. It's unified. This is Carolina food. It deserves to be around. I don't care whether you like it or not. This is what we used to grow. We can get better. Okay? Thanks.